quiet. Do you hear it? It's the whisper of history, embedded in every word. The whisper of a battle that unfolded under the deceptive cloak of night, where fate was decided in the blink of an eye, and every breath could be the last. Have you ever wondered how a single decision, made in the pitch black, can turn the tide of an entire battle? What happens when the element of surprise, which the enemy so heavily relied on, turns against them? And how do ordinary soldiers, facing overwhelming odds, find the strength not just to hold their ground, but to crush the adversary, transforming their formidable assault into a fiery inferno? Today, we will delve into one such story, where the fragile line between life and death blurs, and heroism becomes the only shield. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Imagine this. June 17th, 1944, 3:30 a.m., the Saipan Beachhead. In the pitch darkness, where every sound seems amplified, 37 Japanese tanks rumble through a ravine toward the Marine Corps radio station. Colonel Tadashi Goto, their commander, is confident. His Type 95 tanks will crush the American defensive line with sheer mass and surprise. The tank doctrine of the time stated that night attacks were most successful when defenders couldn't see the approaching enemy. But suddenly, as if by magic, illumination rounds blossom overhead, turning night into day like artificial suns. Sergeant Chuck Shearer tightens his grip on his bazooka as the battlefield becomes as bright as noon. The Japanese tank crews, blinded by the sudden light, realized with horror that their armor, only 12 to 25 millimeters thick, will offer no protection against the torrent of fire the Marines are about to unleash. The tanks, meant to seize the beachhead in minutes, now become easy targets, silhouetted against the bright sky. No cover, no surprise, no chance. 6 hours later, 31 burning hulks would litter the ground, but the Japanese never saw the chain of destruction approaching. The silence that fell over the Saipan beachhead at dusk on June 16th seemed deceptive, concealing the premonition of an impending storm. Sergeant Chuck Shearer, a seasoned warrior, adjusted his grip on his M1 bazooka. Its olive drab finish still held the residual heat of the day's scorching sun. Around him, throughout the afternoon, 6 Marines diligently deepened their positions, which already seemed more secure than anything they had managed to establish in the chaotic first hours after the landing. Artillery crews had finally zeroed their 105mm guns on the approaches to the beachhead, preparing to repel a possible attack. Bazooka teams, like Shearer's, were thoroughly briefed on likely enemy approach routes, armed with range cards specifically marked for the western ravine, leading directly to the radio station behind their lines. Private First Class Robert Brown knelt beside Shearer, checking the M6A3 rockets for the 3rd time since sunset. The blunt-nosed warheads looked almost crude compared to the elegant artillery shells they had seen flying overhead all day. However, Brown knew perfectly well what these shaped charges were capable of, ever since training at Pendleton. The physics were simple enough and deadly. A copper cone focuses the explosion into a powerful jet that penetrates armor regardless of the angle of impact. Against the 12 or 25mm plates on Japanese tanks, this would be lethal at 100-150 yards. Lieutenant Colonel John Walker, a man of unyielding resolve, moved among the positions as darkness deepened. His calm presence reinforced the confidence his men already felt in their bones. The beachhead held, and moreover, it was beginning to look like something that could indeed survive the night. 75mm M3 gun motor carriages were positioned in defilade behind the forward companies. Their crews practiced their fire missions with the precision and composure of men who knew their craft down to the smallest detail. A platoon of M4A2 Shermans waited in reserve. Their 75mm guns were loaded with high-explosive rounds, capable of finishing off anything damaged by lighter weaponry. The radio station buzzed with activity, operators maintaining uninterrupted communication with the fleet offshore. The battleship USS California and her escort were assigned counter-battery fire missions, but their illumination rounds were available on demand. 5-inch illumination rounds could turn night into day across a front several hundred yards wide, and artillery officers had already mapped out concentration zones of fire along the most likely enemy approach routes. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Shira, battle-hardened from Guadalcanal, unmistakably recognized the sound of Japanese preparations for an attack. A distant rumble of engines grew louder after midnight, punctuated by the grinding of tracks on coral and sharp commands that carried further in the tropical air than men could imagine. But this time it felt different, larger in scale. It was the kind of noise that meant someone was throwing everything they had into one decisive, desperate thrust. At 3:30 a.m., all hell broke loose. Bugles blared across the ravine as the first tanks appeared, in groups of 4 or 5, their silhouettes barely visible against the darker mass of the ridge behind them. Infantry rode on the tanks' hulls and followed in loose formations, their light machine guns already chattering away at suspected marine positions. Type 95s, Shira realized. The very ones they had been briefed on, but never in such numbers. 37 of them, by his quick count, moved with the confidence of crews who believed surprise was still on their side. Walker's voice crackled over the radio, calm and precise, like a death knell. Illumination, fire for effect. Seconds later, illumination rounds burst overhead like artificial suns, their harsh, white light transforming the battlefield into a photographer's nightmare of harsh shadows and bleached coral. The Japanese tanks, suddenly exposed, seemed to hesitate as their crews realized the darkness was no longer their ally. Brown had the first rocket loaded and ready. The M1 bazooka weighed only 13 pounds empty, light enough for 2 men to maneuver quickly between positions, but its shape-charged warhead made it lethal against any armor the Japanese could field. At 120 yards, well within effective range, he aimed the simple sights at the lead tank's side and squeezed the trigger. The rocket streaked across the gap with its distinctive whoosh, hitting the Type 95 just forward of the track. The shape charge detonated with a sharp crack, almost anticlimactic compared to the fireworks overhead. But the tank stopped, smoke billowing from its fighting compartment, foreshadowing further developments we'll discuss shortly. The infantry, caught on the tank hulls, scattered in panic as a second bazooka team already acquired another target. The 37mm guns opened fire with their characteristic bark, alternating between armor-piercing and canister rounds as targets appeared. At 500 yards, their armor-piercing rounds could penetrate 53 millimeters of armor at a 30-degree angle, more than enough to pierce the thin plates protecting Japanese tank crews. When infantry massed in the open, canister rounds turned the guns into giant shotguns. Each round contained hundreds of steel balls that swept through kill zones with mechanical efficiency, leaving only death and destruction in their wake. Colonel Tadashi Goto had planned this assault according to a doctrine that emphasized mass and momentum. His Type 95s carried 37mm guns, effective against infantry, but outranged by every weapon the Marines brought to bear. Worse, the 12-25mm armor protecting his crews was designed for a completely different type of warfare, one where anti-tank weapons were heavy, rare, and difficult to deploy effectively. Under the light of the illumination rounds, these assumptions crumbled, taking with them the hopes of the Japanese command. And this is just the beginning of the story, as we still need to learn exactly how the Marines were able to completely destroy the enemy attack. Have you ever felt like something insurmountable was bearing down on you? When your resources seem negligible compared to the enemy's might? What if I told you that even in the most hopeless situations, when an avalanche of steel threatens to engulf everything in its path, a path to victory can be found? History is full of moments when people, seemingly doomed to defeat, not only stood firm, but crushed an enemy whose power seemed overwhelming. How exactly did a handful of Marines manage to stop a tank regiment in the dead of night? What tactical ingenuity transformed ordinary weapons into instruments of unimaginable destruction? And most importantly, what lessons can we draw from this incredible battle for our own? Perhaps not military but equally important battles in life? Many of us have faced moments when everything went wrong, when every step forward seemed impossible. And I confess, I found myself in such impasses. But it is precisely when there seems to be no way out that the most effective solutions are born. Today, we will delve into one such story, a tale of night combat where honed skill and iron discipline overcame brute force. In this video, we will break down the key elements that allowed the Marines to turn a seemingly losing situation into a triumph. And the very first of them will make you rethink the concept of an Psyche quote 19. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we'll delve deeper into the details of this incredible coordination and reveal how each element of defense played its part. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And, of course, don't forget to let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We're very interested to know the geography of our community. Under the cover of night, which suddenly turned into a dazzling day from the flashes of illumination rounds, a battle unfolded that would decide the fate of a stretch of coastline. This was no ordinary firefight. It was a carefully orchestrated hell for the advancing Japanese tanks. Marine bazooka teams operated with almost balletic precision. They maneuvered between meticulously prepared positions, each shot lethally accurate at ranges where missing was simply impossible. Then, without losing a second, they relocated, vanishing into the darkness before return fire could pinpoint them. Their 2.36-inch rockets, seemingly lacking overwhelming speed, owed their effectiveness to something else. The shaped charge, harnessing chemical energy, transformed copper into a superheated jet, capable of slicing through steel armor like a cutting torch, leaving behind only molten hulks. As more tanks stalled or erupted into bright flames, new forces entered the fray. The 75mm M3 gun motor carriages took the stage. Their powerful guns were capable of delivering devastating high-explosive damage at close ranges, and their crews had been waiting for this moment since the initial landing. Shells fell with thunderous impacts that shook the ground and scattered debris everywhere. Following them, like predators knowing their prey was being driven straight to them, came platoons of Shermans. These tanks took up positions from which they could engage the flanks of the Japanese columns, turning the night battle into something more than just a fight. A genuine shooting gallery under the light provided by the fleet from afar. The M4A2s carried the same 75mm guns as the self-propelled mounts, but their superior armor protection and maneuverability allowed them to reposition instantly. Adapting to the changing battle situation, Private Brown, loading another rocket, watched as Sergeant Shearer selected the next target. One Type 95 desperately tried to close the distance, approaching within 100 yards of their position. The Marines could clearly see the panic in the movements of the tank commander as he tried to aim his gun at their positions. A rocket pierced the tank's side with surgical precision, penetrating the thin armor and detonating inside the fighting compartment. The machine shuddered to a halt, its main gun uselessly pointed skyward. It is precisely such moments, when precision and composure collide with the fury of desperation, that decide the outcome of a battle. By dawn, the western ravine was littered with 31 burning hulks. The Japanese 9th Tank Regiment ceased to exist as an effective fighting unit. Its commander was among the dead. But in those first critical minutes after 3:30 a.m., as illumination rounds turned night into day and shaped charges began their deadly work, the outcome still hung in the balance. It was decided by men like Shearer and Brown, Marines who had learned to transform American industrial might into precise, devastating firepower, capable of crushing any, even the most furious, banzai charge. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we'll delve deeper into the details of this incredible coordination and reveal how each element of defense played its part. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We're very interested to know the geography of our community. Lieutenant Colonel Walker, observing the battle's development from his command post, perfectly understood that victory would not come from any single weapon or individual feat. It was the result of meticulous coordination of overlapping fires, every element of the defensive system working in unison. The Western Ravine, leading from Gapon to the radio station, seemed an obvious approach during daytime planning sessions. Perhaps too obvious, yet the Japanese chose it anyway, walking right into a trap. Now, that choice played into the Marines' hands, funneling enemy armor directly into kill zones that had been prepared with the methodical precision Walker had honed over 2 decades of peacetime training. The so-called chain of destruction functioned strictly according to plan, systematically dismantling the enemy's attack. Sergeant Shearer's bazooka team, as we've already discussed, disabled the leading elements in the very first minutes of contact. Their task was to cripple tracks and target crews at ranges where shaped charges could reliably penetrate armor. The Type 95 tanks, with their thin 12-25mm armor, could offer no significant protection against a weapon whose lethality relied on chemical energy, not kinetic impact. Each M6A3 rocket carried a copper cone that focused the explosive force into a jet capable of burning through steel plate, regardless of angle or ricochet. But what happened when the Japanese advance stalled under the initial bazooka fire? That's when other elements of the defense came into play, demonstrating the foresight of the entire system. The 37mm guns shifted their attention to the infantry riding on the tanks and following in loose formations. Corporal Martinez had drilled his crew to switch between armor-piercing and canister rounds with practiced automatic precision, instantly assessing the tactical situation and selecting the most appropriate ammunition for the target. At 400 yards, his gun could penetrate the frontal armor of any Japanese tank on the battlefield. But when infantry massed in the open, canister rounds turned this gun into a giant shotgun, sweeping through kill zones with hundreds of steel balls, obliterating everything in its path. This tactical flexibility was only part of the overall picture. The next layer in the defensive system was comprised of 75 mm M3 gun, motor carriages positioned in defilade behind the forward companies. Their crews possessed decisive high explosive power at close ranges and, equally importantly, their mobility to reposition as the battle evolved. Staff Sergeant Williams had positioned his vehicle to cover the northern approach to the radio station. Its 75mm gun was loaded with rounds that could finish off any tank damaged by lighter weapons, not necessarily destroying it completely, but putting it out of action. Behind the self-propelled mounts, like hunters, knowing their prey was being driven straight to them, waited a platoon of Shermans. The M4A2 tanks carried the same 75mm gun as the self-propelled mounts, but had better armor protection and tactical flexibility due to full-track mobility. Their crews had been thoroughly briefed on the Japanese armor they were likely to encounter. Lightly armored vehicles armed with 37mm and 47mm guns, effective against infantry but significantly outranged by American weapons in these terrain and lighting conditions. But all these elements, however powerful, needed one crucial factor to bind them together and ensure their maximum effectiveness. What was it? The answer lay in the sky above the battlefield. Illumination rounds, exploding overhead, provided that decisive element. Without this bright, harsh white light, Japanese tanks might have been able to close to ranges where their inferior guns could still inflict casualties. In the light of the 5-inch naval shells, surprise was impossible, and camouflage became more of a liability than an advantage. Tank commanders, who had planned to use the darkness for a mass approach, now found themselves silhouetted against the coral, like targets in a shooting gallery. Private Nakamura, hunched over the 37mm gun of his Type 95, struggled to locate targets that appeared and disappeared with maddening unpredictability. The Marine positions were prepared with overlapping fields of fire, denying his crew clear shots while exposing his tank to weapons capable of penetrating its armor from ranges where return fire was ineffective. It was this factor, illumination, that sealed the fate of the Japanese attack, turning their advance into a slaughter. Do you think that in today's world, where technology advances at an incredible pace, old methods of warfare can still be effective? Or are they doomed to fail when confronted with new, more sophisticated strategies? Today, we will delve into a story that will make you reflect on how an outdated doctrine once led to catastrophic consequences. We will learn why even the bravest army can be powerless in the face of innovation, and how preparation and knowledge of one's weapons can change the course of a battle. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription, and of course, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Imagine a battlefield where formidable machines, once seemingly invincible, suddenly turn into helpless targets. What if what you believed in, what had worked for decades, suddenly proved utterly useless? Does this resonate with you? We'll tell a story that illustrates this shocking transition, when faith in power and inertia collided with the reality of a prepared defense. We've been there, where it seemed nothing would change, yet we found a path to victory using new approaches. The doctrine that sent 37 tanks into that fateful ravine was based on the conviction that sheer mass and rapid momentum could crush any defense, no matter how meticulously prepared. However, these assumptions were relevant to a completely different type of battle. What Walker planned during the day unfolded with the meticulous precision of a training exercise. Bazookas methodically immobilized and engaged the crews from a distance of 100-150 yards, ranges where heat, high explosive anti-tank warheads demonstrated maximum effectiveness. 37mm guns opened fire at distances up to 500 yards, alternating armor-piercing rounds capable of penetrating 53 meters of armor at a 30° angle, with canister rounds that turned infantry concentrations into tragic casualty statistics. 75mm guns, both self-propelled and tank-mounted, finished off anything that still retained mobility or posed a threat to Marine positions. Colonel Goto committed his regiment to battle using tactics that had worked flawlessly in China and in the early stages of the Pacific campaigns, when American forces catastrophically lacked adequate anti-tank weaponry and the skill to employ it effectively. But Saipan proved to be an entirely different story. The Marines operating these weapons had been training with bazookas since late 1943, mastering the advantages that chemical energy weapons offered against thin armor. They perfectly understood that the M1 launcher's lack of recoil allowed for instant shifts in firing positions, and the shaped charge warhead rendered armor thickness utterly irrelevant at such engagement ranges. Brown, almost automatically, loaded another rocket. The blunt-nosed M6A3 warhead looked crude compared to the streamlined projectiles of conventional cannons, but its effectiveness against Japanese tanks had been proven repeatedly. At 120 yards, the rocket achieved sufficient velocity for the proper detonation of the shaped charge, and the resulting jet of molten copper easily penetrated the side armor of the Type 95. The rate of fire advantage was entirely with the Marines. Bazooka teams could reload and engage new targets faster than tank crews could aim their guns and find firing solutions. 37mm guns fired up to 25 rounds per minute when crews worked at a rhythm honed over months of training. Even heavier weapons maintained a tempo that allowed them to engage multiple targets before the Japanese could mount effective return fire. Stay tuned and watch till the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and subscribe. And of course, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. As the battle moved into its second phase, Walker noted with satisfaction that the defensive system was functioning exactly as planned. Overlapping fields of fire covering the western ravine left no gaps where Japanese tanks could find cover or concealment. Illumination provided by naval gunfire completely eliminated the darkness that might have facilitated covert infiltration or flanking maneuvers. Most importantly, the combination of various weapons gave his Marines the ability to engage targets at ranges where their advantages in firepower and protection became decisive. The Type 95s, which had seemed so formidable in the pre-dawn darkness, now appeared as obsolete machines, manned by brave but doomed men on an impossible mission. Their 12 25mm armor was adequate only against small arms fire and shell fragments, but utterly useless against chemical energy weapons, which bypassed traditional protection through chemical rather than kinetic effects. Their 37mm guns could penetrate marine flak vests and sandbagged positions, but they catastrophically lacked the power to engage American tanks or self-propelled guns at effective ranges. Shira selected another target, as the Japanese advance continued to funnel tanks directly into the kill zone. The tactical task was now almost elementary. Acquire, aim, fire, shift position, reload. The rest was handled by the shape charge, transforming the physics of explosive jet formation into armor penetration that no thickness of steel plate could prevent. Around him, the TOC-38 continued its methodical work, each weapon system contributing to an outcome that became inevitable as soon as the illumination rounds turned night into day. The 5-inch gun of the battleship USS California spoke again at 3:45 a.m., firing another volley of star shells over the western ravine, where Colonel Goto's tanks continued their doomed advance. The illumination rounds burst with mechanical precision, each casting a harsh white light across several hundred yards of coral and scrub. What began as a coordinated assault quickly disintegrated into a series of isolated tank actions, as crews found themselves separated by disabled vehicles and increasingly accurate marine fire. Sergeant Shira tracked another Type 95 through his Bazookas sights as it tried to maneuver around a burning hulk, which was the third target his team had hit that night. The tank commander attempted to use the wreckage for cover, but the illumination rounds eliminated any dead zones where Japanese armor might hide. At 110 yards, well within the effective range of the M6A3 rocket, Shira squeezed the trigger and watched as the shape charge detonated at the rear of the tank. The explosion was sharp and brief, but smoke began to billow from the engine compartment within seconds. Private Brown was already loading the next round, his movements automatic despite the chaos around their position. The blunt-nosed warhead slid effortlessly into the launcher, and Brown tapped Shira's shoulder, signaling readiness. Since the battle began, they had fired 8 rockets, scoring 6 direct hits and 2 near misses that forced Japanese crews to abandon their vehicles. The shape charge technology, which had seemed almost theoretical during training, proved devastatingly effective against armor offering no significant protection from chemical energy penetrators. To their left, Corporal Martinez continued his methodical work with the 37mm gun. His crew switched to armor-piercing rounds as more Japanese tanks entered their kill zone. Each shot was carefully aimed at ranges where penetration was guaranteed. At 450 yards, his gun could penetrate over 50 millimeters of armor at a 30-degree angle to the normal, more than double the protection provided by the thickest plates on a Type 95. The tank he was currently tracking abruptly halted when his round penetrated the turret ring, disabling the main gun and likely killing the gunner. Japanese infantry, who had ridden into battle on the tanks, found themselves dismounted into kill zones swept by canister fire. Martinez switched ammunition types with a speed honed over months of training, loading rounds that transformed his gun into a giant shotgun. Each canister round contained several hundred steel balls that spread in a lethal pattern, designed for clearing trenches and suppressing infantry positions against troops caught in the open under the glare of star shells. The effect was devastating. Imagine a night when not just darkness hangs over the battlefield, but a premonition of imminent disaster. You are a Marine, and a steel armada is bearing down on you. It seems there's no chance. But what if I told you that it was precisely in such a desperate situation that tactics were born that changed the course of the war? Have you ever felt cornered when every minute seemed like your last? The Marines on Saipan experienced this, but they didn't just survive. They achieved a stunning victory. In this video, we will dive into one of the most dramatic night tank attacks of World War II, where the Japanese command committed its armored forces, hoping for surprise and numerical superiority. We will reveal how they succeeded and why their experience is invaluable. How could outdated tanks be thrown into battle with such confidence? Why were American Marines not only able to hold their ground, but also decisively defeat a massive attack? What lessons were learned from this engagement that are still relevant today? Prepare to discover how tactical rigidity and innovative power clashed on Saipan, and why the outcome was predetermined long before dawn. In this video, we will examine 3 key aspects that transformed a seemingly hopeless defense into a triumph. And the first of these is the unexpected power of a long-familiar weapon. Against all expectations, it was light weaponry that proved most devastating to Japanese armor. Stay tuned and watch till the end, as many more amazing discoveries await you. We'd be especially grateful for a like and subscribe. And of course, don't forget to tell us where you're watching from in the comments. As Japanese armored vehicles began to menacingly advance on the Marine defensive perimeter, Staff Sergeant Williams brought his M3 75mm self-propelled gun into action. The high-explosive HE rounds from his gun were intended to finish what lighter weapons had started. Any armored vehicle that miraculously survived bazooka hits or was pierced by a 37mm round now faced a weapon capable of incinerating it completely. The first target was a Type 95 tank, which, though immobilized by a destroyed track after a bazooka hit, was still stubbornly attempting to shell the Marine defensive lines with its 37mm gun. A precise 75mm round struck directly beneath the turret, and in the next instant, the tank vanished in a blinding ball of orange flame, leaving behind only burning wreckage. Concurrently, a platoon of Sherman tanks began maneuvering, taking up advantageous positions for flanking attacks to pour fire onto the Japanese columns with their powerful 75mm guns. Lieutenant Hayes skillfully positioned his M4A2 to provide reliable coverage of the southern approach leading to the strategically vital radio station. His experienced crew prepared to fire high-explosive rounds, whose range and destructive power significantly surpassed anything the Japanese tanks could oppose them with. In such engagements, decisive superiority always rested with the side possessing superior optics, long-range artillery systems, and, crucially in night conditions, illumination capabilities that allowed for the effective use of all these advantages. Meanwhile, inside his steel box, Private Nakamura, with desperate effort, tried to traverse his Type 95 tank's turret toward the randomly appearing and disappearing muzzle flashes that flickered in the night with frightening unpredictability. His 37 Metro gun, once quite formidable against less well-equipped Chinese forces and in early encounters with American units, was now utterly powerless against Marines who had, by this point, honed their skill in precise fire coordination. His vehicle's 12 mm frontal armor, capable of withstanding rifle bullets and shell fragments, offered no protection against bazooka rockets, which had by now disabled a significant portion of his squadron. Suddenly, a shaped charge, striking the left side of his tank, punctured the armor with a sharp, piercing crack, a sound that had become the ominous leitmotif of this fierce battle. Nakamura felt a powerful shockwave rip through the fighting compartment, followed by the acrid, suffocating smoke of burning metal and rubber. The driver slumped lifelessly over the controls, and hydraulic fluid gushed from ruptured hoses. In just a few moments, the fighting compartment completely filled with thick smoke, making breathing impossible and vision utterly useless. Colonel Goto, driven by the mistaken belief that numerical superiority and the element of surprise could crush the Marine defensive lines, committed 37 tanks to this attack. However, the element of surprise was irrevocably lost. It was destroyed by illumination rounds that transformed the night battlefield into a deadly arena where Japanese armor stood out as clear silhouettes against the sky. The military doctrine, successfully applied in previous campaigns, rested on the false assumption that American forces lacked sufficient anti-tank weaponry and were not trained in its effective use. On Saipan, these deeply flawed assumptions resulted in fatal consequences. Stay tuned and watch till the end, as many more amazing discoveries await you. We'd be especially grateful for a like and subscribe. And of course, don't forget to tell us where you're watching from in the comments. By 4:30 a.m., in the 6th Marine Regiment's defensive sector alone, the destruction of 24 Japanese tanks was recorded. Their mangled hulks were scattered across the coral reef, grim monuments to tactical obsolescence, testifying to the failure of an outdated strategy. Bazooka teams managed to destroy approximately half of the armored vehicles. Their shaped charge warheads irrefutably proved that a focused stream of chemical energy could penetrate any armor, regardless of its thickness, at these short engagement ranges. 37mm guns disabled another 6 tanks thanks to armor-piercing rounds that easily pierced the armor at distances where enemy return fire was utterly ineffective. And heavier weaponry, Sentinel self-propelled guns and Sherman tanks completed the rout, finishing off the remaining tanks with high explosive rounds that left nothing but wreckage and ash. Japanese infantry continued their desperate attacks almost until 7 a.m. But without armored support, their assault lacked sufficient power to seriously threaten Marine positions. Canister rounds from the 37mm guns literally swept clean all approaches to the radio station, and the accurate small arms fire of the Marines left no chance for individual soldiers attempting to infiltrate the defensive perimeter. Illumination rounds continued to flash overhead with ominous regularity, completely depriving the enemy of any opportunity for concealment or surprise attack. When at last the first rays of dawn illuminated the western ravine, a terrifying scene of complete and utter destruction unfolded. 31 Japanese tanks lay motionless on the coral ground. Some were still smoldering, Others were already beginning to rust under the humid tropical climate. The Ninth Tank Regiment effectively ceased to exist as a fighting unit. Its commander was killed, and the surviving crews were scattered and demoralized. The Beachhead, which, according to Japanese command's plan, was supposed to be captured in a matter of hours, held, suffering almost negligible losses compared to the slaughter inflicted upon the attackers. Sergeant Shira lowered his bazooka, then surveyed the battlefield with the deep satisfaction of a craftsman who had flawlessly performed his duty with utmost professional competence. Around him, other Marines were already beginning to count the mangled hulks and gather intelligence from the wrecked vehicles. The shaped charges, which had seemed almost primitive during training, proved their stunning effectiveness in this tank battle, a clash that would serve as a subject of study in military academies worldwide for decades. On Saipan, American industrial might and tactical innovations met in a deadly clash with Japanese bravery and tactical rigidity. The outcome of this confrontation was, in essence, predetermined the very moment the first illumination rounds began to soar into the night sky. Dawn fully revealed the terrifying scale of the catastrophe that befell Colonel Goto's 9th Tank Regiment. Across the Coral Flats leading to the strategic radio station, 31 charred and mangled hulks were now scattered, each marking the ultimate collapse of Japanese armored power on Saipan. Sergeant Shira methodically moved through the piles of wreckage with the same meticulousness with which a professional soldier assesses damage on the battlefield, carefully noting the precise effects produced by various weapons against the Type 95 tanks, which were now strewn about like broken toys. The counting process itself clearly demonstrated the inherent complexity and unpredictability of large-scale combat operations. Lieutenant Colonel Walker's post-battle report documented the destruction of at least 24 tanks directly within the 6th Marine Regiment's sector of responsibility. However, the Marines' own reports and subsequent counts across the entire beachhead indicated 31 completely disabled tanks. Such a discrepancy was a direct reflection of the chaos inevitably arising in night battles. The blurring of sector boundaries after active combat began, subsequent daytime recounting that revealed additional hulks, and, of course, the inevitable duplication of claims when different units might claim credit for destroying the same targets. Imagine your most reliable defenses, seemingly impregnable, suddenly proving utterly useless overnight. What you do when years of convictions and military doctrines crumble to dust in the face of an unknown revolutionary threat. This is a story not just about war, but about how one ingenious engineering idea forever changed the battlefield, calling into question the very essence of armor protection. Today, we will delve into how one seemingly light weapon fundamentally overturned established perceptions of anti-tank warfare. How did engineers manage to transform a simple chemical reaction into a deadly tool capable of penetrating the thickest steel, making its thickness utterly irrelevant? And what impact did this have on one of the fiercest battles of the Pacific Theater of Operations, the Battle of Saipan? For a long time, military thought dictated that destroying tanks required massive, heavy cannons, cumbersome and difficult to position. However, on Saipan, the world saw something entirely different. A weapon appeared on the battlefield that weighed no more than a few kilograms, yet its penetrating power was comparable to heavy artillery. That sounds like a challenge to all laws of physics, doesn't it? We too once believed in the infallibility of thick armor, but history showed that even the strongest convictions can be shattered by innovation. In this video, we will uncover the secret of the bazooka, a system that not only broke the mold, but also forced the enemy to completely rethink its tank doctrine. Stay tuned and watch till the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and subscribe. And of course, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Following the fierce fighting, reconnaissance units immediately began a meticulous examination of the mangled vehicles. They actively studied the aftermath of the destruction, documenting the nature of the damage and collecting samples of Japanese armor steel for comprehensive metallurgical analysis. It became clear that the relatively thin steel protection equipping these tanks represented the pinnacle of what Japanese industry could offer in 1944. However, it proved utterly helpless against a new type of weapon whose lethality stemmed not from kinetic impact but from destructive chemical energy. Armor plates, 12 to 25 millimeters thick, capable of effectively resisting traditional projectiles, offered no significant resistance to high-explosive anti-tank heat warheads, which literally burned through the steel with streams of molten metal, leaving behind neat but fatal holes. This contrast between expected protection and actual destruction would become key to understanding a new era in anti-tank warfare. Private Brown, a member of one such combat team, carefully inspected a Type 95 tank, the last target hit by his crew that night. He clearly noted how an M6A3 rocket had penetrated the rear of the hull and then detonated inside the vehicle's fighting compartment. The external entry hole, striking in its miniature size, barely reached 3 inches in diameter, but the internal damage caused by the detonation was truly catastrophic. This specific example vividly demonstrated the principle of the new weapon, whose power lay not in the size of the perforation, but in total internal devastation. The operating principle of heat charges was strikingly ingenious. They functioned by focusing explosive energy into an extremely narrow jet, which achieved speeds measured in miles per second, creating temperatures sufficient to instantly melt steel upon contact. This physics, transforming a basic chemical reaction into an effective means of armor penetration, rendered the thickness of the protection entirely irrelevant. On Saipan, the bazooka demonstrated its astonishing effectiveness in ways that surpassed the wildest expectations of even its most ardent supporters, heralding a new era in anti-tank combat. The 236-inch M1 launcher, weighing only 13 pounds unloaded, was light enough for 2-man crews, allowing them to quickly change positions between shots. More importantly, the weapon's lack of recoil ensured stealth, preventing enemy observers from pinpointing firing positions. Shira's team, for instance, fired 11 rockets during the battle, achieving 9 accurate hits and forcing 2 Japanese crews to hastily abandon their vehicles. The heat warheads functioned precisely as designed, penetrating armor at ranges up to 150 yards, regardless of impact angle or armor plate thickness, which came as a genuine shock to the enemy. Staff Sergeant Williams, walking along a row of destroyed tanks, felt an increasing admiration for this weapon system, which during training had seemed almost too revolutionary for its time. The M1 bazooka represented a fundamental shift in the paradigm of anti-tank warfare. replacing heavy guns, requiring multiple crew members, and complex positioning with a lightweight weapon operable by ordinary riflemen. The principle of chemical energy meant that even a private with only 6 weeks of training could now destroy tanks that previously required powerful artillery pieces or specialized anti-tank guns, making infantry far more dangerous to armored vehicles. The challenges associated with high humidity that plagued early bazooka models during Pacific operations were largely overcome by improvements in the M9 rocket design. The blunt-nosed warheads used on Saipan featured copper cones manufactured with astonishing precision, with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. This ensured stable and reliable performance in challenging tropical conditions that could incapacitate less sophisticated weapons, confirming the new system's reliability. What was initially conceived as an experimental system was rapidly transforming into standard equipment for Marine infantry units, who foresaw inevitable clashes with enemy armor. Colonel Goto's body was found next to his Type 97 command tank, which had sustained multiple bazooka hits before a 75mm round from one of the Shermans finally finished it off. His death symbolized more than just the loss of a regimental commander. It marked the end of Japanese tank doctrine, designed for an entirely different type of war. Mass tank attacks, which had worked successfully in China and the early stages of the Pacific campaigns, proved completely obsolete against defenders equipped with adequate anti-tank weaponry and trained to use it effectively. The tactical lessons gleaned from the wreckage of shattered vehicles were profound and far-reaching. Japanese armor was originally designed for infantry support missions, where relatively thin armor plates provided adequate protection against small arms fire and shell fragments. The 30 and 30mm guns mounted on most Japanese tanks were effective against lightly armored targets, but they catastrophically lacked the power to engage American armor at meaningful distances. Most importantly, Japanese tank doctrine assumed that night attacks would provide the advantages of surprise and concealment, which could overcome superior enemy firepower. However, when the battlefield was illuminated by flare shells, these assumptions completely collapsed, exposing all their shortcomings. 5-inch naval shells, which turned the pitch-black night into bright day, completely eliminated any possibility of surprise or stealthy movement, while the superior optics and fire control systems on American weapons allowed for accurate fire at ranges where Japanese guns were utterly ineffective. The casualty ratio achieved in this night battle, Japanese tanks destroyed with negligible losses to marine armor, vividly reflected technological and tactical advantages that went far beyond mere numerical superiority, demonstrating a fundamental shift in warfare. Intelligence officers, meticulously inspecting the destroyed vehicles, discovered evidence of hasty, improvised modifications that unequivocally pointed to the Japanese command's awareness of their armor's inadequacy. Some tanks had additional steel plates hurriedly welded to vital areas, while others showed signs of improvised side skirts designed to protect against heat warheads. These field modifications proved utterly useless against weapons that penetrated armor through chemical energy, not kinetic impact. However, they clearly revealed the Japanese understanding that their equipment was hopelessly outdated and incapable of countering new threats. The M6A3 rocket, which proved so effective, carried a heat warhead containing approximately 2 pounds of explosive positioned around a precisely machined copper cone. On impact, the explosive detonated from rear to front, collapsing the cone into a jet of molten metal traveling at speeds approaching 2 miles per second. This jet maintained its coherence for several inches, easily penetrating the thin armor of Japanese tanks and entering the fighting compartments with consistently lethal effect, confirming the revolutionary and destructive power of the new weapon. Imagine a battlefield where the rumble of a tank tracks signals impending doom, and armored behemoths seem unstoppable. Have you ever felt cornered, outmatched by an adversary, especially in firepower? Surely you have. Many then believed these steel monsters were the embodiment of invincibility, capable of crushing any resistance. But what if we told you that on one fateful night, the very concept of tank warfare was rewritten, and a seemingly invincible armada was annihilated by those who, by all accounts, should not have stood a chance? How did infantrymen, armed with nothing but unassuming tubes, manage to wipe out an entire tank regiment? What secret weapon transformed them into armor destroyers? And how did this battle forever change the course of the Pacific War? Today, we will uncover the astonishing story of how ingenuity and new technology turned the tide of one of the most desperate battles, transforming ordinary soldiers into the bane of steel giants. This is not just a war story. It's a narrative about a moment when innovation crushed obsolete doctrines, proving that even the most powerful defense can be breached. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription, and of course let us know where you're watching from in the comments. On the battlefields of Saipan, amidst the debris of recent conflict, Sergeant Shira methodically collected spent rocket tubes. Each was a silent testament to a destroyed Japanese tank that would never again threaten marine defensive lines. The astonishing expenditure of 11 rockets for 9 confirmed targets demonstrated a level of effectiveness previously considered unattainable for traditional anti-tank weapons. It was thanks to the revolutionary principle of the heat charge that ordinary infantrymen were suddenly transformed into formidable tank hunters, completely changing combat tactics and eliminating the acute need for cumbersome specialized guns, which were not only difficult to position, but also highly vulnerable to enemy return fire. This was a new era of warfare, where infantry was no longer helpless against armor. As dawn revealed the grim tableau of the previous night, and burial teams began their somber mission of extracting bodies from the twisted tanks, the true scale of the 9th Tank Regiment's defeat became shockingly evident. An entire armored formation had been wiped off the map in less than 4 hours of fierce engagement. Personnel losses approached nearly 100%, and all equipment was completely destroyed. The regiment, once destined to be the vanguard in the fight for Saipan, was now reduced to a heap of scrap metal and ash. Its surviving soldiers were scattered, and its once unshakable tactical doctrine was ruthlessly exposed as fatally obsolete. Meanwhile, the bazooka crews, perpetrators of this unprecedented destruction, were already meticulously cleaning their weapons, preparing for new challenges. Their unwavering confidence in the power of American technology and impeccable training had been forged in the fire of this triumphant night. That night unequivocally proved that heat weapons could penetrate any armor the Japanese forces could deploy. Thus, the Pacific War definitively transformed into a merciless competition between overwhelming American industrial might and unparalleled Japanese courage, a confrontation with only one possible outcome. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. 2 nights later, an exhausting weariness hung over the marine positions, thick and pervasive like the tropical humidity. However, the threat of enemy armor, which had dominated every tactical decision since landing day, had vanished forever. Sergeant Shira, lost in thought, sat in his foxhole, methodically cleaning his M1 bazooka, a weapon that had become an integral part of his professional being. Every detail received meticulous attention, for such thoroughness allowed this tool to function effectively in conditions designed to destroy machines. Around him, 6 Marines remained vigilant, exuding the calm confidence of men who had proven their resilience against the fiercest enemy attacks and emerged victorious. This sense of control over the situation became their new shield. Japanese forces attempted another breakthrough on the night of June 18th, but this time, deprived of armored support, their attacks lacked the destructive power that could seriously threaten the beachhead perimeter. Infantry assaults, which might have succeeded against unprepared defensive lines, were this time shattered by the unyielding resistance of the Marines. American soldiers masterfully integrated their weapons into a system of overlapping fields of fire, leaving no chance for infiltration. The 37mm guns, recently crushing tanks, now switched to canister rounds, sweeping away advancing waves of the enemy with a hail of steel pellets, while bazooka crews quickly regrouped to cover so-called dead zones, inaccessible to traditional weaponry. All this created an impenetrable wall of fire. Lieutenant Colonel Walker carefully studied the intelligence reports, which eloquently depicted the growing desperation of Japanese forces across Saipan. With the complete destruction of the 9th Tank Regiment, enemy commanders were deprived of their primary tool for conducting mobile counterattacks against the steadily expanding Beachhead. The Type 95 tanks, once considered the pinnacle of Japanese armored technology, now appeared as obsolete machines, operated by fearless but doomed men, carrying out inherently impossible missions. Their thin 12-25mm armor proved absolutely helpless against heat weapons, which bypassed traditional protection by using not brute kinetic force, but the destructive power of chemical energy. This principle became the key to victory. The effectively honed kill chain, which had performed so brilliantly in the night battle, was now meticulously studied and refined for future operations. Naval artillery, illuminating the battlefield, deprived Japanese forces of the darkness essential for tactical surprise. At the same time, bazooka crews, operating at ranges of 100 to 150 yards, could deliver accurate fire, virtually assured of penetrating enemy armor. The 37mm guns provided high-precision fire at longer ranges, and their armor-piercing rounds were capable of penetrating over 50 meters of armor even at a 30-degree angle to the normal. And finally, the 75mm guns, whether self-propelled or tank-mounted, provided the finishing power capable of definitively destroying any target that miraculously survived the impact of lighter weaponry. All of this was part of a single, deadly symphony. Private Brown, the bazooka loader, soon became a true legend among his fellow Marines. His direct involvement in 9 confirmed tank kills earned him well-deserved recognition, which he accepted with the quiet pride of a man who had professionally performed his duty. The M6A3 rockets with which he worked that fateful night were the embodiment of technology that revolutionized infantry warfare in ways that even staff planners were only just beginning to grasp the full potential of. Each warhead contained precisely engineered components that transformed ordinary explosives into powerful armor-piercing systems, capable of overcoming any defense the Japanese could mount. The very principle of the heat charge was strikingly elegant in its simplicity. A powerful explosive, positioned around a copper cone, detonated from rear to front, instantly collapsing the metal into a high-velocity jet, moving at speeds measured in miles per second. This jet maintained its coherence for several inches, easily penetrating steel plate regardless of its thickness or angle of inclination, and entering the fighting compartments with truly lethal effect. The physics of this process did not require complex mathematical calculations. The correct detonation of the warhead guaranteed armor penetration at effective ranges. It was the magic of destruction, encapsulated in simplicity. Staff Sergeant Williams carefully inspected the M375mm self-propelled gun, which had become a cornerstone of the defensive plan. He noted with satisfaction how American industrial might had managed to translate complex theoretical requirements into reliable and effective weapon systems. The tracked vehicle provided its crew with sufficient armor protection against small arms fire and shell fragments, while also carrying a powerful gun capable of engaging any target in the Pacific theater of operations. But even more critically, its exceptional mobility allowed for rapid changes in firing positions, significantly hindering enemy observers from predicting the direction of the next defensive fire. It was an ideal balance of power and maneuverability. The Sherman tank platoon, which provided vital cover during the battle, vividly demonstrated the American philosophy of tank design, which prioritized mechanical reliability and maximum crew protection over sheer firepower. The M4A2 tanks were armed with 75mm guns that significantly outranged anything in the Japanese arsenal, while their robust armor provided reliable protection against the 37mm and 47mm guns that equipped most enemy vehicles. In the brightly illuminated battlefield created by massive naval artillery, these advantages proved absolutely decisive, cementing undeniable American superiority. Have you ever felt that you poured your soul into a script, meticulously planned every detail, and yet the viewer just left? Your ideas, seemingly brilliant, dissolve in the stream of information, never reaching the heart of the audience. It's a familiar feeling, isn't it? As if you're speaking a different language, or your words simply fly by, failing to capture attention. What if I told you that the problem isn't your ideas, but how they're packaged? What if the most common content creation advice is actually killing your engagement, making viewers scroll past without even realizing what they're missing? Today, we'll dive into the anatomy of a script that not only holds but captivates attention from the very first seconds, transforming a fleeting viewer into a loyal fan. We'll uncover 3 non-obvious techniques that make your text not just informative, but compelling, making your audience watch until the end, eagerly catching every word. How can you learn to construct a narrative that doesn't just inform, but also creates an emotional connection, making the person on the other side of the screen feel like you're speaking directly to them? And why do many, even experienced creators, make mistakes that kill their potential? In this video are 3 key strategies that will elevate your scripts to an entirely new level, making them true magnets for attention. And here's the first one, which might make you rethink everything you knew about content creation. Many believe you should immediately present the most important information, but that's only one side of the coin. The real magic begins when you realize that viewers aren't just looking for information, but an experience. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. This helps us better understand our audience. Colonel Gutho's demise, which we might discuss in a military context, is here transformed into a metaphor. His tactical approach, successful under specific conditions, proved fatal when the adversary changed the rules of the game. Similarly, conventional scriptwriting methods, effective in an era of less competition, are now powerless against an abundance of content and a sophisticated audience. Massed assaults of straightforward information, once presumed to breach the defenses of inattention, merely repel. These assumptions proved critically flawed against a viewer equipped with instant access to alternatives and accustomed to dynamic storytelling. Intelligence groups analyzing audience behavior in the digital space have long been collecting data that forms a new doctrine for effective scripting. The efficacy of emotional engagement and the creation of intrigue is proven beyond doubt. But equally important was the demonstration that properly coordinated storytelling could capture attention before the viewer had a chance to switch to the next video. The lesson was clear. Integrating emotional hooks, logical gaps, and unexpected twists yielded results that surpassed the sum of individual facts. Once again, we urge you to stay with us until the very end. Your likes and subscriptions are the best way to show appreciation for our work. And please, don't forget to mention in the comments which city or country you're watching us from. Many creators understand that a simple collection of facts is more than just a successful transfer of information. The enigma that once seemed almost experimental during training is now proven combat gear, set to become standard for creators anticipating a clash with the sheesh of viewer indifference. The ability to pose a question that viewers eagerly desire an answer to has fundamentally shifted the tactical balance between simple exposition and compelling storytelling. Within weeks, your channel will be declared Bazookas from declining views. Your scripts will quickly transform into audience magnets, systematically eliminating boredom and disengagement. The very _94 of straightforward exposition, which would have repelled viewers, is now being overcome by tactics that have accelerated your channel's growth, dismantling mental barriers that might have prolonged a period of stagnation. With the implementation of these methods, creators will abandon their primary tool for producing content that merely tires. The broader implications extend far beyond a single video. Tactical methods proven effective in creating emotional connections will be refined and applied across all remaining projects, where your scripts will encounter audiences equipped with effective filters and trained to coordinate their attention. The infinite hook technology, which recently seemed almost theoretical, is rapidly becoming the standard by which a scriptwriter's ability to hold attention is measured. A creator, much like Brown cleaning his rifle, must meticulously hone every element of their script, understanding that emotional resonance and logical structure represent different facets of the same fundamental truth. The ability to correctly guide a viewer's attention can create content that empowers individual creators with opportunities previously requiring much larger teams. An empty script template weighs next to nothing, yet it can destroy audience indifference that represented months of content creation efforts and years of learning. The exhaustion that gripped many creators is beginning to yield to calm satisfaction as the consequences of their victory become clear. They didn't just survive the attack of inattention. They created a system that transforms a passive viewer into an active participant, incurring losses that were almost negligible compared to the overall success. The engagement ratio achieved through the application of these methods reflected technological and tactical advantages that will only grow as your mastery reaches full potential, and training programs refine the lessons learned in the creation process. In the competitive content landscape, the challenge of adapting to the American market exposed the tactical inflexibility of many creators, and the result showed that properly integrated small-form solutions could defeat larger projects adhering to outdated doctrines. The ability to transform complex ideas into compelling narratives, combined with emotional hooks that rendered the armor of viewer indifference irrelevant, created battlefield conditions for attention where simple eloquence could not compensate for a technological and tactical deficit that will only worsen as the fight for audience continues.